When we look at success, we tend to only see the end picture, the glam, the shout, the appreciation. But we miss to see the sacrifice it took for one to reach at their destined plateau. I'm Treasure Kalambe, and in the process, we're going to sit with professionals and successful individuals from different industries to look deeper in their journey, to unravel the wisdom, the lesson, and the grind it took in order for them to walk in their purpose. Come on this journey with us and discover some key tools that will help you in your process. Hello, precious people. I'm hoping you are doing well. Welcome once again to The Process. This is your host, Treasure Kalambe, and it is again another privilege and an honor to have you all to be able to have another wonderful conversation that we have in store for you. Listen, if this is your first time on our platform, I want to make sure that you subscribe yourself on the page. Make sure you click that like button and click that bell so that you are not missing any of these amazing conversations that are being brought in your living room. And today we have another great one for you. And listen, I already want to give this info right off the bat, this disclaimer. I believe today might ignite a lot of emotions. I believe this conversation today may hit home for many, whether it's for yourself, whether it's for a loved one, whether it's for a neighbor, somebody in your community. So I encourage you, as you watch today's episode, if you need the support, if you need the help, you need guidance, you need the assistance, know that you are not alone. You could reach out and help is available for you. In the comment section, you'll have all the details and all the information of places where you can reach out for support if today's topic is speaking to you or is speaking to somebody that you know that is in need of this support in this season of their life. As I said, we have an amazing conversation in store for you today. I have a wonderful guest who has granted us the privilege of coming on our platform, a young lady full of vibrancy, energy, wisdom, and a passion to help young women and women become the best version of herself. And that's why I'm so excited to be able to have the conversation that we're going to have with her today, really digging in some deep stuff, but I know it will bless somebody in their process. Without further ado, it is my honor and my privilege to welcome on the platform today, Joëlle Kabisoso. Good evening, dear. How are you doing?
Good evening. I am good. I'm feeling well, blessed to be here. So, thank you again for having me and just being open to allowing me to share and to just really get into this conversation tonight.
Yeah, and we are really excited for it. I know we were talking a couple minutes just before we went on that, this is an important topic and it's one that really needs to be talked about. Taboo in many ways in many communities, but it's one that we need to address. But before we get into the need of our conversation, why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers, let them know who you are, what you do, and then we'll take it from there.
Of course. So, as introduced, my name is Joëlle Kabisoso. I am a Congolese Canadian here in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm the founder of a nonprofit organization called Sisters in Sync, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more. But we are focused on supporting Black women and girls, and our mission is to help them be, become, and belong. And on the side, I am a co-founder of a language learning app called Yekola, which focuses on preserving African languages. So, kind of wearing a lot of hats, figuring out life in the process. So, this will be interesting.
Exactly. You carry a lot of hats, so that's why we're so grateful you had some time in your busy schedule to be able to come and be with us. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk a lot about your business as well and the organization. But today we wanted to tackle a really, really deep and an important topic, and that's overcoming. And I know when we talk about overcoming, we can talk about a lot of things. There's a lot of things in our life that can happen to us that we need to overcome. But specifically today, we wanted to talk about overcoming abuse and the trauma that's sort of involved around abuse and how one can really pull themselves out, gain their confidence back, and get themselves thriving again. But before we get started, I never want to take for granted that these terms are just understood and known by people so easily. So I really want to start right from the beginning. When you hear abuse for you, what does that mean? What is abuse? How can we define abuse?
Yeah, so abuse can mean a lot of things. As we know, abuse doesn't just look like one thing. It doesn't just look like physical abuse. And I think oftentimes that's the misconception that we have is if it's not physical, then it's not necessarily abuse, right? But nowadays, and I think even for as long as the word abuse has been around, we're seeing terms such as physical abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, and even sexual abuse, right? And those are all things that could kind of fall under that umbrella where somebody is in a position where they have no control and somebody is taking that control away from them. Again, whether it is physical abuse, meaning you're being beaten, you're being hit, sexual abuse, it's anything such as rape or any type of sexual act that you don't consent to. And as well as we can go into financial abuse, where we see that happen a lot, especially in marriages, right? Where someone might have control of all the finances, and you might think it's just a matter of no, the person is leading the household, but then you find that the other partner doesn't know the accounts, they don't have passwords, and they kind of have to ask for money in order to do even just basic life things. So abuse is really one of those things that to me, I'm really trying to demystify so that people can understand that it is not just physical, and every type of abuse is important, and any type of abuse can honestly lead to all of the abuses that we've just discussed.
And that is so true. It's such a range. And I think that's why oftentimes it's hard for many people to be able to identify it and to even be able to assess it, especially when it's happening to them. And so they stay trapped within that cycle. So somebody that might be finding themselves in a relationship or around a group of people at an event, how would one define abuse in the sense of what are some of the signs that can identify that, hey, this person is being abusive? I know you mentioned control, but what are some other signs? Because they could be so minimal in the grand scheme of things. Right? In today's society, they can be normalized a lot as well, where people are like, oh, that's not that serious. But what are some signs that people can identify to know that this person is being abusive or that this person is an abuser?
Yeah. So, like we said, because there are so many different types of abuses, each level of abuse really has its own signs and things that you can look out for. So, one of the things that I always say is looking out for the way in which people speak about certain things, right? Are they always making excuses for somebody? Are they always pacifying things that are they're saying? Or are they really just kind of leading with this era where they're okay with everything that the person says because they may have a secret about them or they may control certain aspects of their lives, right? So oftentimes in relationships we see people saying things such as like, oh no, that's just how they are, or oh no, my partner won't let me do this, but it's okay, or I have to ask his permission, right? So although those may not necessarily mean that the person is being abused, there are certain things that you want to look out for, right? Because if you notice a pattern, then that's cause for concern. It's cause for you to kind of maybe probe a little bit more, because a lot of the times those that are being abused may not recognize it, right? And it will take a really long time for them to really get to a point where they're saying, wait a minute, this is abuse. I don't have control over my own emotions. I don't have control over my finances, or this person is touching me in ways that, make me feel uncomfortable. And a lot of the times you hear people say, well, why don't you just leave, right? And that's also one of those misconceptions when you're in an abusive situation, is that it's very easy to just get up and leave. Because for us on the outside looking in, it's like, well, I would have left, or oh, I wouldn't let anyone talk to me like that. But
Right.
we forget that when you're in a situation and when the stakes are high, because oftentimes they are, there may be children involved, there may be finances involved, or careers involved. It's not always easy when you're in the midst of those situations to be able to kind of identify and say, hold up, something doesn't feel right. So it's one of those things where it requires, honestly, a lot of practice to be able to identify abuse, and a lot of courage, right? Because you don't want to put somebody in a place where you're making them feel something that they might not be feeling, but you maybe want to just start introducing certain things, right? Start asking those questions, maybe bringing the person around other people that you think they could identify with, but because it's very, very delicate,
Mm,
like you don't want to jump in head first and start to kind of project or start to think that only because it could actually push the person further away and get them to kind of remain in those abusive situations, especially if it's something where they feel like they have no way out.
mm. And that is so true because there's nothing worse than sort of that sense and that feeling of hopelessness, right? That really, when somebody's feeling hopeless, then they'll almost begin to justify what might be happening to them and find ways around coping, quote unquote, with that, or existing in that reality, though they know it's not necessarily positive. And another one that I know that really, really comes up a lot, and I think about that, and when I think about African cultures and communities, when I think about faith-based environments and communities as well, is around the belief system, right? That often folks will not, who are finding themselves victim of abuse, will be afraid to speak because who's going to believe me? Who's going to believe
Mm,
me that this
mm,
model man, that this model individual, right, is mistreating me? I'm just going to come out looking like the ungrateful wife and the ungrateful woman, and I'm just trying to destroy black men and so on and so forth. So that fear and of not being believed can hold people back. So how does somebody overcome that? Because I know that's a real struggle. How does somebody overcome that fear to go out and to seek help when they're identifying that, hey, I'm being mistreated? I can really tell that
yeah.
this pattern is unhealthy. How does someone overcome that fear of not being believed so that they can make that first step towards seeking help?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting that you kind of phrase it in that way because to me, I think that it's not so much of what somebody should do to get over the fear of being believed, but it's what we can do, the people that are going to be offering that support or the people that are around. What can we do to
Right.
move away from the biases, move away from certain stereotypes, and really get the education that we need? And I think that's really where it starts, especially when we're talking about cultural context, right? We live here in Canada, multiculturalism, right? It's everywhere. We don't have one set culture here. And so that in itself brings out a whole bunch of different issues, a whole bunch of different belief systems where I can for sure know that this happened to me. I experienced it. I know it happened in the way that I'm saying that it happened. But if you don't have the education to understand what I'm saying, or you don't have kind of that sensitivity training, you're never going to receive what I'm saying, right? You're never going to believe me. You're never going to want to help. So the thing with a lot of victims and survivors is it's not a problem to say what happened, right? We could do it. We will walk into a room and we will say it to anybody that will listen and that we think will be able to help us. But it's usually on the receiving end where people are just not ready to hear these things. I remember in my case, and when I was kind of going through my own rape and I had to kind of disclose, the first thing I was saying was like, well, how is anybody going to help me? Right? What are they going to do? What can they do at this point? Because you think about, let's say, a parent or you think about a friend and you view them just as a parent and just as a friend, right? And so you're like, well, my mom won't know what to do or my friend won't know what to do, right? And so I think in order to get to a place where people feel, I would say, more confident because we want to disclose, we want to go ahead and seek help, but we just don't know that the people that we're going to will actually be able to help us. And so, really starting with that idea that I don't need to be in a specific role or in a specific position to
Right.
receive some sort of training, right? Because ultimately, some people don't go to the police or some people don't go to a teacher and they feel safer, let's say, going to a pastor or they feel safer going to a sister or a friend. And that
Mhm.
might be the first point of contact for somebody that's looking to disclose their experience. And
Mhm.
so the question is, what will you be able to do? Will you have the knowledge? Will you have the training? Will you have the sensitivity? Right. And it honestly doesn't cost much to say, I'm just going to read up on what goes on in this space. Like, what can I do? Even just certain things, such as how can I be there for you? Or what do you need us to do in this? Right? Those are things that empower survivors to really say, like, okay, this person gets it. And no matter what happens, at least I have this person on the side. So it's
Mm.
more of how can we mobilize the community? How can we mobilize the people that are around us so that when we're coming in and we're sharing these experiences, people are receptive, beliefs aside, right? Because, like you mentioned earlier, you can say, oh, well, that person would never do it. Well, we don't know what people are capable of, unfortunately, right? And if we
Yep.
stay stuck in that kind of mentality, we're honestly just saying that violence is okay. And we know that it's not.
And that is so true that we know it's not. And I love how you put that. It's more so teaching us who are the ones who are going to be offering the help, the parents, the siblings, the pastors, and so on, that we need that sensitivity. And that makes me think about just how normalized so many things are of time, and that there can be a challenge, or sort of a battle, right? Where the
Mhm.
and the faith believers, the community members, and all of that may want to be able to provide the help, but be limited in even being able to be empathetic to that situation, right?
Mhm.
And may quickly, always, I can remember every time as a young man, whenever you do something wrong, before asking you what happened to you, it's like, what did you do? Right? Like,
Exactly.
get yourself in that situation. So, what would you say, maybe as an advice, as those in the community, what approach could they take to not necessarily go to that victim blaming right away, but a different introduction to even setting up an atmosphere for that conversation? What would you say? Because it's so natural to want to pose those questions like, well, what did you do? Why were you there? Why didn't you have anybody around? So what kind of advice in your experience would you give to those in the community that would be the recipient to give the help?
Yeah. The first thing, honestly, is just being open, because the lack of response is always due to being closed minded, right? When you're not willing to see somebody else's perspective, when you're not willing to even accept, and I think that's the biggest thing, accept that other people have different realities than you, you're not going to be open to even hearing what they have to say. And they may be talking, but you're already victim blaming. You're already, creating all of these assumptions. And your reaction as a member of the community or as a parent is honestly what could be standing between life and death for that person. And so that's why I always say, like, be as open-minded, even if in the midst of it right away you're having a hard time maybe just grasping what's being said, or even to having a hard time believing what's being said. At least be open to hearing what the person is sharing, because what can happen is, if maybe you don't know how to respond in the moment, it's okay. Like, I think people forget that it's okay to not have a response or have an
Right.
answer. Be open about it, number one. If you have to take back, the time to go and think it through, like, I think most recently I was joking with my mom that I had applied to be on Love is Blind and I was accepted. And, when I get on the show, I'm going to get married to a stranger. And she was like, I just need a moment to process this. And I was really shocked by what she said. And I was like, wow, I was expecting for her to, like, give me a reaction right away. Like, what are you doing? Why do you want to go get married on TV? But she was just like, I need a moment to process this and then I'll get back to you. I was like, this is interesting, right? I'm like, okay, even though I knew I was joking, I was like, I'll give you the time to process this and get back to me, right? And that may be like more of a lighter situation, but I think if we apply that approach of even being able to just say, I don't know what to say right now, but I hear you, and let me get back to you, or let me see how I can help you, or even do you need help, right? And then that can allow you that minute, that day, that couple of hours to really go back and ask yourself, one, how are you going to proceed? Because if honestly to you, you're like, I really don't believe this person, at least you had the opportunity to think it through and come back and say, maybe I'm not the best person for you to share this to, right?
Right.
And that in itself is actually life saving. It's life saving. It's actually part of the training is being able to come back and say, I don't know how to support you with this, right? And so if you're not open minded, you're not going to be willing to take a moment and go back and one, process what's being shared, process your own beliefs, and then assess how you actually want to react or respond to what's being disclosed.
Mhm. And that is so true. Just that openness, because I think sometimes, especially thinking from maybe parents' perspective or just elders in the community, it's easy to want to get solution based and solution focused right away, and you want to try to
Mhm.
fix it right at that moment in time. But understanding that it is a process, right, and that we don't have to have all the answers. And the reality of it, abuse, as you mentioned, has so many layers. It's so complex that there isn't always sort of a black and white solution to something, right? There could be children involved, there could be safety issues involved, right? There could be a lot of different things involved that it may need time, but just having that openness of being able to listen, you're so
Right.
right that it would provide such a help. And I want to pose this. This may be a bit challenging, but kind of, I think it's something that needs to be addressed as well, because I find that today in our society, we can sometimes get so fixated on the problem at hand, but not being able to take a step back and looking at, okay, what are some of the contributing factors that may be making these problems harder, right, to be able to deal with? And there's two things. And my first question to that is around sort of this hypersexual society that we have today, right? You think about today in comparison to before, things are a bit more public, things are a bit more glamorized. There's a higher push when it comes to sexuality in many forms of ways across the streams of society, education, and all of those things. We see that it's more prominent, and we see the impact that it's having on young men, right? Young men younger now are having access to things like pornography, magazines. So a
Mhm.
certain level of perversion is existing from a really, really early age that's affecting them when they get older to not be able to properly handle relationship and begin to mistreat those that they enter into relationship with. What would you say when thinking about this hypersexual society that we have today? What would be needed when we talk about our school systems and our communities to help reduce this in order to provide some solution in reducing incident of abuse, especially for young men who are going to grow up tomorrow, be men, and be in relationships and marriage?
Yeah. It's like a loaded question. So I'm going to try to like break it down. Just kind of to, I guess, take people on a journey of really understanding how this hypersexuality really plays into, like you said, young men becoming perpetrators, but also women kind of remaining in this state of just allowing certain things to happen. And I say this not in the context of rape and abuse, but just in that kind of like when you're looking at things on the media, such as videos, right? A lot of the content that we're consuming right now, it's so normal to create like an OnlyFans account or to be doing these different things because we've normalized our bodies as um, some sort of transaction or some sort of, currency, right? And so that in itself creates its own issues. But I think even just when we examine that, and I'll maybe go into my own story and just really how I see kind of hypersexuality playing in my life. And so I guess for those that may have never heard my story or even first encounter with me, so at 17, I was a victim of a gang rape by 5 white boys. And for me, that was my first experience to the world of cybercrime or cyber assault, right? Having had my naked picture put on social media and having had people talking about me in a way that was very degrading, being referred to as a monkey, and really just being vulnerable to people that I didn't know having opinions. And honestly, till this day, I'm like, who knows who has access to that picture that was posted and that video that was posted of me? And so for me, what it ended up becoming was a mechanism. And I think this is very vulnerable, but it became one of those things where I trained and I programmed myself that sexuality would save my life. That it was easier for me to be very open to sex, to be very open to kind of allowing my body to be something that keeps me safe, not realizing that it was actually just creating more danger for myself and that it was putting me in situations that, looking back, I'm just like, oh my goodness, like, how will I ever live this down? And when I say that, I became very a part of a movement that for me right now, I'm just like, I don't regret it, but I see kind of how damaging it was. And I see how it really took away a lot. Like, I'm at a point right now where I'm just like, could I ever be married having gone through everything that I've gone through? Could I ever be considered as pure? Could I ever be considered as, somebody that could really and truly give myself to somebody without it being almost transactional, right?
Mhm.
Without it being as a mechanism to feel safe. And I remember in 2019, 2018, I went on a date, and everything was going well, or so I thought. And we got to his house and we were just kind of there talking. And my friend sent me a message and she said, "Hey, Joelle, I'm heading back. Let's meet downtown and let's head back together." Because that was always the plan. And so I was like, "Yeah, no problem." And when I went to tell him that I was going to leave, he's like, "Oh, no, you're not." And I was really confused because I'm like, well, yeah, like, the time is passing and I need to go home. And he said to me, well, you thought I was going to take you out on a date and you're just going to go home. And so in that moment, I was like, all right, you know what this means. And so for me, my sexuality became my shield. It was easier to have sex with him than to feel like it was going to be taken from me. And so that's kind of how I proceeded in any kind of relationship. Was even if I honestly didn't even like the person, I was just like, it's just easier to have sex because every time I just feared that, like when I was 17, it would just be taken from me. And so when I started to get really into social media and I started to see that these things were so normalized, to me, I was like, okay, well, that's fine. That's how it should be, right? Avoid getting raped, consent to sex. Even if even in the back of your mind, you're like, what is going on? Why am I doing this? Why is it so easy? It
Mhm.
just felt like the safest option, right? And now we're seeing kind of a lot of young girls, a lot of women on OnlyFans and on these websites creating this type of content. But I think we sometimes are very quick to judge, not knowing the root of why they're doing it. Because a
Very.
lot of that comes from trauma. A lot of it comes from this idea that it's easier to sell your body, it's easier to be okay with certain things that are happening because it's keeping you safe, right? And so it's almost like, yes, what can we do to encourage women and girls to not fall that down that path and not normalize it so much? But a lot of times it's that compassion that's needed, that empathy, like really trying to understand. And and I think even in a lot of these podcasts that I've been seeing, you hear a lot of women saying that they're doing these things as a response to trauma, that they're in a place where they don't necessarily want 15 years from now their children to see certain videos or certain pictures of them on the internet, but for them to feel safe and for them to feel like at least I have some sort of agency or autonomy over my body. This is probably the easiest thing for me to do, is just to be okay with my body being a currency, it being some sort of exchange for my own safety, right? And
Yeah.
then on the flip side, looking at this overconsumption for men, and again, when men feel like they can purchase things or when men feel like they can have things on demand, it
Mhm.
kind of creates this God complex, I think,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like, well, I have money and we know that girls don't date broke men. So I can
Mhm.
basically do whatever I want. I can get whoever I want. And it's just this, I want to say, this very tricky place where it's like, what can we do to, again, mobilize men to understand that this isn't what it looks like, right? What they're consuming or what they're purchasing or who they think that they're impressing,
Mhm.
it's not always because they want to, right? It's because, again, a lot of it comes from trauma. A lot of it comes from being unable to detach yourself from what's happened so that you can really protect yourself, right? And Yeah, and just kind of really starting education early. I wrote this paper honestly just for fun because it never went anywhere, but I wrote this paper on the early socialization of education for boys. And it really just focused on how do we make sure that in our schools and in our homes that the topic of sex and the topic of consent is
Mhm,
introduced honestly right? Because men also are victim of abuse. Men are victim of rape. Men are victim of sexual violence. And that doesn't get talked about a lot, and it really should. But a lot
mhm,
of the times, too, what they consume could be a response of their trauma, could be a response of the experiences. And so it's like, how do we say at a very early age that we need to teach this, that we need men to understand this, and that because respecting a woman's body or respecting a woman is one thing, but understanding a woman, I think, is a completely other thing, right? And
mhm,
it's just a matter of really saying, like, listen, we're not going to be, nervous to talk about these things anymore because clearly it's affecting people's life. Men are ruining marriages and relationship due to addiction to pornography, right? They're taking away people's innocence due to that feeling of ownership over a woman's body. And a lot of this, as we know, can date back to certain things such as like slavery and what we're consuming, like the Jezebel, right? That stereotype that exists and that persists that Black
mhm,
women just as a whole invite sex, that the way their bodies are made, that the way they behave
mhm,
is kind of welcoming. And when the media and society normalizes that, it's
mhm,
so hard to kind of tell people, hey, we're people too. We deserve respect as well. So really kind of not being scared to talk about it and introducing it right away, but maybe
mhm,
also taking the time to understand, not from a judgmental place, but like, what did this young girl go through that is leading her to be in this place? Or,
mhm,
because sometimes it's not more of just what we see, it's so deep. Like things run so deep. And unfortunately, many of us are just not prepared to dig that deep or even start having those types of conversations.
And that is so true. I think that is so true. And I think about, I think about being a pastor. I think about, especially within the four walls of, the institution that is the church, that oftentimes there isn't a lot of the conversation of sort of removing the veils on what leads up to, who a person is, right? Talking about that areas of their
Um,
soul, their emotions and their intellect and their experiences and their trauma, and truly how that has such an intricate part of building who they are. I'm thinking
yeah,
about my as a young man growing up, a lot of things that you learn or a lot of things that you do, you can trace it back to where you've been grown, where you've been raised. Sorry, you can trace it back to experiences you've seen, traumas that you've seen. Right? It cultivates healthy
yeah,
and unhealthy belief systems that later on become sort of the mode and the motivation of how you behave. And then when you find yourself that, oh, like you said, everybody else is doing it, it gets normalized to a place where many aren't even aware that they're doing wrong until some legal actions are brought against them. And even when some legal actions are brought against them, they still can't make sense of it, right? I used to run a
exactly.
group called Partner Assault Response Program. So men who had been, offenders and perpetrators of abuse against their partners, and they had to go through this rehabilitation process, quote unquote, learn about abuse
Mhm.
was. And it would be a 16-week program, and we would spend 12 to 13 weeks just to get folks to understand that their actions were wrong.
Yeah,
Because it's
yeah,
so ingrained in who they were, and it was so natural,
mhm,
right, in this male-dominated
yeah,
society that they couldn't even the honest ones just couldn't get there. They couldn't get to understanding why that was there. So I think you're so right that a lot of work has to be done, really beginning to peel back and to look at the core and giving people that space to be able to talk and to grow. And I want to, take a shift a little bit and start looking more towards solution and healing and thriving and overcoming. We
mhm,
talk those victims and individuals that may find themselves now they've come out of that situation, right? Um, But
Yeah.
where do I go? What do I do? How does the individual begin to regain their confidence, regain their identity? You mentioned
Yeah.
sometimes, the aftermath will be, well, let me do whatever, right? But then other times it will,
Hmm.
oh, I want to do better. I want to heal.
Yeah.
I don't want this to be who I will be in the future, or a label to who I will be forever. What would you say, or what advice would you give to those individuals? How do they start that process? Because I can't imagine how difficult that is. Where do they begin to even starting to think about the idea of healing and growing and becoming,
Yeah.
a better version of themselves in whatever area?
Yeah, you know what? As we know in anything, whether it's something as extreme as like a sexual assault or even just losing your job, healing is not linear, right? You can't necessarily draw a roadmap to healing and say, okay, it's been 2 weeks, it's been 3 months, it's been 5 years. This is how I have to start my healing journey. And I think sometimes I feel like right now these days healing has been such a buzzword and has been such a little like something that just gets really thrown around, and we don't really understand, I think, the root of what the word healing really is and what that actually looks like. Because a lot has to happen for you to get to a place where you're like, wait a minute, enough is enough. And I know for me, I'm still in that place of healing. I'm still in a place where I thought I was healed and then something happened and I'm like, wait a hold on, I got to go back and I got to work through this. And also reminding people that like it's okay to start over when you're healing, right? Just because, let's say, it's been 5 years and you feel like, oh, I've healed and something happened and it brings you back to year one, that's okay too, right? And that is what allows people to hopefully get to that end of that healing journey, is being able to acknowledge the fact that it's not going to be as easy, it's not going to be um as soft as we might want it to. And I used to
Mhm.
always tell my friend, because she always used to say, oh, I just need to get over it. I'm like, if you're getting over something, you're going to be getting over it for the rest of your life. You got to get through it. Because I envision it as a wall. If I'm jumping over a wall, who knows? There may be a next wall. I got to jump over again. But if I'm just like walking through that wall and breaking
Mhm.
through it, there's no chance that when I look back, the wall is still going to be standing up. There may be some pieces of it, but to me, I view it as that's a better place than if I was back at that wall. And so it's really one of those things where the first thing, it's just one, accepting where you're at. I think we really sometimes want to accelerate that journey and think that just because one person healed in a couple of minutes or a couple of days, you have to do the same thing. But it's accepting where you're at and just being okay with it. Being okay with the fact that maybe right now is not the time. Maybe right now you might not fully understand what that healing journey actually means if you were
Mhm.
get to get into it. You might not understand that it might mean that you might have to lose more in order for you to gain. You might have to, just completely unveil yourself, completely get naked, if you will, in order to get to the root of what it is that you want to work. And that means addressing certain things that you're just like, oh my goodness, you know that it's an issue, you know that it's something that you got to work through, but
Mhm.
how do you do it? And so I think once you've kind of done step one, which is kind of accepting where you are in your journey, accepting that, there's no set timeline and there's no set expectation, I would say the next thing to do is finding a community. Like that is going to be such a huge, huge, huge piece of the
Mhm.
healing journey, is finding a community, and not a community that you're necessarily going to be trauma bonding with, because a lot of the times, when you find somebody that's gone through similar trauma, you can kind of, attach to one another, and sometimes healing will not happen because
Mhm.
all you are doing is reminiscing on those things or
Yeah.
talking about how those certain things happen. But diversify the people that are going to be in that community. Let it be people that have experienced different types of trauma, that have gone through different types of life journey, and from there pull from it, right? Because I think it was President Obama. I remember going to some dinner when he was speaking, and he was like, I build my table, but I don't bring like-minded people to my table. Because what's the point of having people that think like me at the table, right? And so,
Mm,
what's the point again of just being in a space or in a situation where everybody else is in crisis, right?
mhm,
You may not be able to get sound advice or sound guidance if all of you are in a moment of crisis or in a space where you don't even know who you are or what you want. So finding that community, but diversifying who's in your community, I think can definitely offer a lot of benefit. And then the
mhm,
next thing is being okay with the fact that you may never be the same again. I think
mm,
sometimes when we heal, we maybe go back to who we were. Like, oh, but I used to be this fun person. I used to be this, or I used to do that. Maybe
mhm,
once you've healed, you may not go back. Those things may no longer be for you because now you have a fresh perspective on life, a fresh perspective on where you're going. And I know for me, it was really hard. It was like, oh my goodness, what if I'm not that fun, bubbly girl anymore? What if I'm not this or what if I'm not that? And so I just held on to who I was before
mhm,
the trauma and a little bit of who I was in the midst of it, because
mhm,
to me, it felt like, well, if I let go, I lose my identity. And who do I become, right? I don't want to start at my age, rebuilding my identity and getting to know myself because it's uncomfortable. Like, if you got
mhm.
to sit in a room and really get to know yourself, you can
You-
leave there loving yourself or just being like, who is that, right? So I think that's
mm,
one of the things that is going to be very important. Just understanding and accepting the fact that you may no longer be who you were. You may no longer have certain people in your
mhm,
life if you truly want to heal. And when you're going through sexual violence, I would say one of the things in the healing journey is learning to actually love your body again, right? For me, it's been a lot of like your body is actually, and it again might sound cliche, but it's like I'm really now realizing, yo, like my body is actually a temple. Like this is
mm,
actually a safe place. It's the only place that I have that belongs to me, that nobody else can honestly have access to unless I say no. And I
mm,
just kind of started to really grasp what that means and encouraging myself to love my body. And that means like loving yourself at whatever weight you're at, loving yourself however you look like. Because again, when you go through something like that, you don't even feel like this body is yours anymore. You don't even like you don't recognize yourself, right? And that's one of the biggest thing. It's like we only have this one body to live in, and really really being intentional about learning to love it, learn it to even rediscover it in a
mhm,
place that doesn't look like I have to do this to be safe, or I have to wear this to get attention, or I have to, drink
mm,
this or do this is going to be very key. And I think I'll leave it at that only because, again, there's not really a roadmap, but I know that for me, I'm not there yet. I'm still healing every single day. And I think once a week, I'm back at zero. But it's a journey that I'm really excited about, right? And one of those things that I'm learning to be okay with the fact that certain things are just not going to be the same. But
mhm.
that's important in order to come out of it and say, wow, I can't believe that that's what I went through. And this is now who I am.
Wow, and that's amazing, and that in itself is such an amazing piece of nugget. And I know that drives and motivates a lot of the things that you do today, right? Just that passion to help many of the young women and many women to be able to begin that journey. Because the beginning of it, and like you said, the length of it and the complexity of it can really look different from situation to situation. But I know it's something you're very passionate about. Won't you talk to us about Sisters in Sync, your organization, and how your organization works towards addressing a lot of the things that we've been talking about, and
Mhm.
how it works toward supporting victims, to get from the situation that they're in to becoming, to beginning to believe in themselves again and standing. Talk to us a bit about your organization and the work it's doing in this particular field.
Yeah. So Sisters in Sync, it's honestly the baby I never wanted in a sense where like I like I never would have thought that this is what I was doing. I didn't even know what this is. And I think there's still times where I'm like, I don't even have a name for what I'm doing necessarily, because it was never something that I saw myself doing. I never thought that the first time I would share what had happened to me at 17 would be on a public platform, because as soon as it happened back in 2013, I didn't say anything to anyone. Those that knew, knew. But again, as we go back to kind of what we talked about earlier, traditions and beliefs and different cultures played a part in why I remained silent. And it was hard for me because I was graduating high school and I was going into university. I was on my own, and I was in a place where so much influence, again going back to this culture of being over sexualized and kind of using yourself as currency or as a commodity. I was in a space where I'm dealing with low self esteem. I'm dealing with this fact that, the people who did this to me are talking about me. They're continuously kind of taunting me. And I don't feel safe telling my family because I've already internalized certain things about how they're going to react to me or what they're going to say about the situation. And so that, with being a freshman, alcohol, and men is such a deadly combination. And so I remember always telling myself that by the time I turned 21, that would be the end. Because I was at a point where I was just exhausted. Like I could not do it anymore. I was just kind of looking at graduation and that degree to make my parents happy as the end, as the one thing that I needed to feel like I was getting peace and I was going to be healing. And so I think it was my last semester of university, or I might have been already graduated. But I remember just being at a women's conference with my mom, and they were just asking, "What are you grateful for?" And I was just, I don't know what came over me, but I just said, "I'm grateful to be alive because I didn't think that I would be here today talking to you all." And I just started to cry. And that's when I was just like, yeah, when I was in high school, I ended up getting gang raped. And this is exactly what happened to me. And in the moment, I couldn't really process what I had done. I was like, wait a minute, what are, like, what's going on? And
Mhm.
not realizing that in the midst of all this women was the first time that my mom was hearing about this too. And so even for myself was like, this might be something I didn't even think was going to be brought up. I just thought that, again, because pushing things under the rug is so normalized, I thought that it would have been one of those, you heard me, okay, great, we're just going to keep going. And
Yeah.
so when my mom had the conversation with me, I was really shocked because I'm like, oh, this wasn't supposed to happen. We're supposed to just like, sweep this
Mhm.
under the rug and move on. And when she had the conversation with me, I realized this was a real thing that had happened to me. And it was something that, unbeknownst to me, was going to affect the rest of my family, right? Just in the way that maybe I carried myself or in the way that I viewed them, because I had so much anger for them and they didn't even know. They didn't know
Mhm.
what had happened to me. And I just always felt like, because of what I feel like my community would say, or because of what I feel like my parents will say, I'm not going to tell you guys anything. And for that, I'm upset with you. And so, fast forward literally a week later, I get a random email, and one of those emails where I'm just like, it's just for online shopping, my Sephora, everything. It just goes in there. And so I'm like, let me see what package is on its way. And in going in there, I see an email from somebody, and I had never met this girl. Like, she was not a part of, like, our paths just never crossed.
Mhm.
And so she had reached out to me to say, hey, I was given your name by somebody who said you won a scholarship a couple years ago. We're looking for people in the community that have had experiences of violence,
Mhm.
and we wanted to know if you knew anybody. And I was like, oh, yeah, like, sure, I don't know anybody, but if you need volunteers for, because they were going to have an event, I told them, if you need volunteers, I'll be happy to help. Let me know if you need me to hold a door, if you need me to clean, whatever it is, I'll help you. And the girl just says, okay, can we get on a call? I'm like, again, thinking to myself, why do we need to get on a call when I told you I'll hold a door? Like, what do we need to talk about, in that regard? And
Mhm.
so in speaking with them, I don't know, they just made me so comfortable. And automatically I was like, yeah, now that you mention it, I went through this situation when I was younger, and this is kind of how it's affecting me. And this was the response that I got when I initially went to disclose to the police. And
Mhm.
from there, I joined their project. It was called Violence 360. We
Mhm.
did a campaign that was backed by the provincial government, and I shared my experience as a rape survivor and at the intersections of being a Black woman, of being an immigrant woman, of navigating the system, and also experiencing a hate crime, right? Because what happened to me was a rape by five white boys who then
Right.
tweeted that they had raped a monkey.
Mhm.
And so now I'm in this position like, oh, whoa, I'm almost like a walking billboard for all of these things that you hear on the news or that you think only happened back in the days of slavery or back in the days of, heightened racism in the United States. So in hearing that, I started to get a lot of messages. And I was like, first of all, how did y'all even reach me? Like, where did you get my information? But
Right.
people, and I tell you, women from across the world and every
Wow.
age reached out to me. And one particular story that stood out was the 60-year-old woman who told
Oh,
me that something similar had happened to her. She was
wow.
about 16, and I
Wow.
was the first person she was telling.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it. I'm like,
Wow. Yeah.
like, you're 60. How 60? This is the first time that you're sharing this, right? And
Mm.
I just felt this kind of like almost sense of responsibility. Like, I don't want to be 60 and feel like I've had to
Yeah.
live my whole life not being able to let somebody in or to even accept or receive healing that I need. Because, I mean, granted, I don't know the state that she's in. I don't know, what her journey particularly looked like, but just to know that this woman entrusted me at the time I was, I think, 23 with this
Mhm.
information. I just felt like something needed to happen, but I didn't know what. And then
Right.
I just started to get more messages of people being, do you have a platform? How can we connect with you? Do you have a community? Is there a group? And again,
Mhm.
very confused because, like, what are what are you talking about, right? And just from there, I started to kind of brainstorm with my brother, like, okay, what can we do to just maybe hold space, right? It doesn't have to be something that is big. Maybe we just meet once a month, or I just post something, or I just check in one on one with the people that have reached out. And
Mhm.
from there, Sisters in Sync was created with this idea. And a lot of it is due to this woman that had reached out, but it's due to this idea that as women, as girls, we all go through the same thing in life. Whatever your journey looks like, someone
Mhm.
must have gone through it or someone is going to go through it. And so, really, this idea of being in sync, right? That kind of, you know, that you could go to somebody and share something and they might have gone through it or they might have known somebody who's gone through it. And so that's even where the name came, just kind of that idea of being in sync with one another, of being able to support each other and to journey with one another. And now it's 6 years later and we are, I would say, a real like organization. I got staff, I have an office, like all of these things. And a lot
Mhm.
of what we're doing is one, really working on trying to change that culture of victim blaming, right? I was
Mhm.
told by the police, maybe next time you shouldn't drink too much. I heard from people in the community that I was embarrassing my family by speaking out. Even for myself, like I always wondered, what could I have done differently to not have been in that situation? And
Mhm.
so, really, a lot of that work that we're doing is how do we get people to change the way that they view sexual violence and that they view victimhood? Because Black women, we don't get to be victims. We
Yeah.
don't get to sit there and actually cry. We don't get to
Mhm.
have, the news stop the world to talk about poor little Black girl, this and this happened. We're expected to
Mhm.
find a solution. We're expected to, take justice into
Yeah.
our own hands. And
Mhm.
again, back to those stereotypes, the strong Black woman, right? That's what we're expected to be. And
Mhm.
so, in trying to really encourage people move away from that victim blaming mentality, I also
Mhm.
want to encourage Black women to be victims, right? You don't have to be a survivor right away. It's okay to sit there
Mhm.
and cry about what happened because something just happened that might change the way your life is forever. And you don't need to be a survivor right away. You don't need to act like you have it all figured out or that you're capable. And so, really, just supporting women through that journey. A lot of it is really with young girls specifically right now is kind of our mandate is sowing seeds in the lives of young girls. And when I tell you, so many of them are going through so much
Yeah.
that I'm just like, are we ever going to get to a place where we don't have to hear these stories again, where I don't have to, create a program such as this or do this kind of advocacy work? So it's a growing kind of organization, but a lot of it is really just how do we support Black women to be able to become and belong, but how do we also educate communities knowing that a lot of our healing is actually in the hands of the way in which people respond to our disclosure.
Wow, and I've had the experience of being a part of some of the summits that you've done, and definitely seeing all the work. So I'm encouraging anybody watching to know that this is an amazing organization. I know you hear about a lot of organization, and you're like, well, are they really just trying to grab people's money? But no, this is really one that is centered in the community for the community and really doing the work, getting their hands dirty, and they're there, they're working, they're supporting, they're building, they're reconstructing those who feel broken. So, how do people reach out to you? How can they learn more about Sister in Sync? How can they connect with the services? Where do folks go? Is there a website? Is there an Instagram page? How does someone who may have been watching us through today's conversation say, you know what, I'm that individual, and I feel I need that community and I need that support. So how do they come in touch with Sisters in Sync to start their journey?
Yeah, so you can literally find us everywhere on social media. So our website is www.sistersinsync.org. And one of the good things is right now we actually received funding from the Law Foundation of Ontario to be able to really put together a program that supports victim and that provides education. So I would say right now is probably the best time to get involved with our organization in any capacity. We are hosting community consultations virtually once a week just to gather the experiences and the stories. So just I don't know if this is a fun fact or if it's just a fact, but Black women, especially in Canada, our stories of violence are not reflected in any type of national database or any types of stats. So if you were to go on Stats Canada and really try to understand how prevalent is violence in the Black community for Black women and girls, we don't have our own category, right? We fall under kind of racialized or other, but everybody else has their own categories. And so one of the things that we really want to do is, as uncomfortable as it might be, we need those stories. We need these things in writing. We need to be able to ensure that when we look up information, when we're doing our research, when we're even talking about programs and services, that we're really able to see the experiences of Black women and girls reflected. And so, this is an opportunity for anybody that has been a victim or anybody that is a survivor, as well as anybody that supports those people in that journey. So it's a really good time. The government themselves felt like they could trust us in putting this program together. And for us, it's really about changing the way we view Black women. Like I said, I'm tired of hearing about a 13-year-old or a 16-year-old that has gone through this, but it takes a lot of courage, number one, to share your story, knowing that somebody might not respond to it well, knowing that you might be blamed, but it is so needed because your story can save somebody's life. And I know I've had people tell me this personally, and as much as I sometimes can't see myself in this space where people view me as, as how they view me, I have to kind of come to grasp with the fact that although traumatic, this might be purposeful. This might be what is saving somebody's life right now and what is encouraging somebody today. And so, really, just making sure that if you can, in any way, whether you're accessing our services to gain confidence or accessing our services to be able to go and disclose and file a formal charge, we have the support that you'll need. We have a community that we're building with other service providers. And it's also a space of learning, right? Lately, we've been really trying to engage a lot of men because we're not going to end violence. We're not the ones inflicting it on us, right? And so really mobilizing and engaging men. So on every social media platform, you can find us. We're always open to new ideas, to new collaborations, volunteers, all of that. But just know that it's a safe space for sure.
Wow, and thank you so much, Joel. I know, this is a conversation that we can continue to really dive deeper into, but I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for really taking the time and then really the openness to be able to have this conversation. I know that it's going to be beneficial to somebody that's tuned in. And when you were talking, before I let you go, just right when you were talking, often when we hear purpose, it is enveloped in ways in which we don't understand, you know, but it really comes from the core, and you
Mhm.
can hear that really you are walking in your purpose. And, we just want to give you your flowers today, let you know that the work you're doing is impactful. The work you're doing is making a difference, and it is changing many lives. And you're right, you may not be able to see it, but we want us who are on the outside watching what you do, we want you to know that, you're doing a tremendous work with your organization. Keep it up, don't stop. We're rooting for you. And like you said, and I'm going to speak to all the men who are watching, it's time for men to be allies. It's time for men to step up. It's time for men to also get involved in the work. If there's going to be a difference, we have to be involved in that change. Some of those deep conversations that have to be had, looking at some of our own trauma, as we mentioned today, looking at some of our own perceptions, ideologies, philosophy that we've created that have been engraved in our societies for years and years. It's time for us to begin to address those so that we can strive for a safer world for everyone, where everyone can thrive, particularly our Black sisters and women. So once again, Joel, thank you so much. We'll make sure to have all the information on the screen so
Thank
that
you for having
anyone who wants to connect can be a part and reach out to you. So I just want to say a great big thank you. And I hope we can have you back to have some more conversation like this. It would be a great pleasure for us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, this has been a highlight of my day. I had a horrible week, so this honestly was something I was looking forward to. So I'm really just blessed to be here. And yes, you know how to reach me, and I'm here. Anything you need. I love what you're doing. I'm a big supporter. So yeah, I'm not too far away if you ever need anything from me as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Wow. What a conversation. What a topic. As we said in the beginning, maybe throughout this conversation, it may have been heavy for some, but we believe it is important. It's one that needed to be had. And we want to encourage you. If at any moment in time as you've been hearing this conversation, you have found yourself, you found someone that you know, someone that you love, someone that's close to you, reach out to them. Share this information that's on the screen, that's in the comment section. Get the website, www.sistersinsync.org. Go and give somebody support. You could be saving somebody's life simply by sharing this video and sharing this information. And we again want to tell anyone that may be finding themselves in a situation where they feel hopeless because of what has been done to them. Know that hope is still available. You don't have to figure it all out in 1 week, in 1 day. You just got to make that first step in just deciding that I'm going to begin the journey. And there's a whole community that is available for you because you have purpose. God loves you, and greater is ahead for you. It has been your host, Treasure Kalambe. Thank you so much for once again being on this platform, The Process. We can't wait to see you next week. And until then, God bless. God keep you. Take care.